Imagine this. You're still standing at the edge of that dark forest. But now, something's different. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's hope. Or maybe it's just the realization that the life you're living safe, predictable, and comfortable might not be the life you truly want. Let me ask you this. What's the cost of staying where you are? Sure, it feels safe to avoid your fears, but at what price? Your dreams? Your authenticity? Your peace? The forest is scary, but do you know what's scarier? Waking up one day and realizing you never became the person you were meant to be. Carl Jung believed that the journey to self-discovery is one of the most terrifying and rewarding experiences a human being can undertake. Why? Because it's not just about adding new skills, habits, or goals to your life. It's about breaking yourself apart and putting the pieces back together in a way that feels true. It's about confronting the parts of yourself you've ignored, denied, or been ashamed of. And that, my friend, is no easy task. But here's the beauty of it. Every step you take into the unknown, every fear you face, every shadow you integrate, it all brings you closer to your true self. And I'm not talking about the version of you that checks all the boxes society gave you. I'm talking about the version of you that feels alive. The version of you that doesn't need to hide, pretend, or perform. The version of you that's free. Let's get real for a moment. Most of us live with masks. We wear them at work, with friends, even with our families. And these masks aren't random, they're carefully crafted to protect us from rejection, judgment, and pain. But here's the problem. The more time you spend wearing a mask, the more disconnected you become from who you really are. Jung called this the persona, the idealized version of yourself that you show to the world. And while your persona might win you approval, it can never give you fulfillment. Why? Because deep down you know it's not the real you. Click subscribe to this channel to get more insights into human psychology. So how do you break free from the persona? How do you stop being who you think you're supposed to be and start becoming who you really are? The answer lies in the shadow. If the persona is the mask you show the world, the shadow is everything you hide behind it. It's the anger you suppress, the vulnerability you avoid, the dreams you tell yourself are impractical. It's the parts of you that were labeled too much or not enough by others, and so you buried them. But here's the paradox. The more you reject your shadow, the more power it has over you. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more force it has when it pops back up. Jung believed that true growth happens when you stop fighting your shadow and start integrating it. This doesn't mean you let your anger, fear, or insecurity run wild. It means you acknowledge them, understand them, and find a healthy way to express them. It means you stop seeing parts of yourself as good or bad and start seeing them as pieces of a whole. Because the truth is, you can't become your true self while rejecting parts of who you are. Let's do something practical right now. I want you to think about a time when you overreacted to something, a comment, a situation, a person. Maybe someone criticized you and you lashed out. Or maybe someone ignored you and you felt crushed. Whatever it was, ask yourself this: what was really going on? Because 9 times out of 10, the thing that triggered you wasn't the real issue. The real issue was a part of your shadow trying to get your attention. Maybe that criticism reminded you of a time when you felt worthless. Maybe that rejection touched an old wound of feeling unlovable. The point is, your reactions are clues. They're windows into your unconscious mind, and if you're willing to look through them, you can start to understand yourself on a whole new level. But let's be honest, shadow work isn't fun. It's messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes even painful. You might discover things about yourself that you don't like. You might realize that some of your biggest problems aren't caused by other people, they're caused by you. And that's hard to face. But here's the good news. Every time you confront a piece of your shadow, you reclaim a piece of your power. You stop being a victim of your unconscious mind and start becoming the author of your own story. Jung said that the process of individuation, the journey of becoming your true self, is like a hero's journey. Think about every great story you've ever heard. The hero starts out in their ordinary world, living a life that feels small or unfulfilling. Then something happens that forces them to leave their comfort zone. They face challenges, confront their fears, and sometimes even fail. But through it all, they grow. They discover strengths they didn't know they had. They find allies to help them along the way. And when they finally return home, they're not the same person, they're transformed. Your life is no different. Right now, you might be in the ordinary world, maybe you feel stuck, scared, or unsure of what's next. But here's the thing. The call to adventure is always there. It's in the things that scare you, the dreams you've put on hold, the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The question is, will you answer the call? Will you step into the unknown, even if it's uncomfortable? Will you risk failure, judgment, or pain in order to become the person you were meant to be? Let me leave you with this thought. What if your fears aren't trying to stop you? What if they're trying to guide you? What if the very thing you're running from is the thing that will set you free? Because here's the truth. You can't become who you're afraid to be if you keep running from your fear. You have to face it, feel it, and move through it. And when you do, you'll realize that the forest isn't as dark as it seemed. In fact, it might just be the most beautiful place you've ever been. So, you're at the edge of the metaphorical forest. You've decided to take a step forward, but now something strange happens. The moment you start, you feel resistance. Your mind begins to flood with excuses. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if people laugh at me? This is your fear talking. And let me tell you something, it's not going to shut up. Fear doesn't just disappear because you've decided to face it. In fact, it often gets louder. But here's what you need to understand. Fear isn't your enemy, it's your compass. Carl Jung believed that the things we fear the most are often the things we need the most. Why? Because fear points us toward our shadow. And the shadow isn't just made up of the bad parts of us. It also contains our unrealized potential. Think about that for a second. The very thing you're most afraid to do might be the thing that unlocks your greatest gifts. But you'll never know unless you're willing to face it. Let's try a thought experiment. Imagine a child who loves to draw. They're passionate, creative, and full of ideas. But one day, someone, maybe a parent, teacher, or friend, tells them their art isn't good enough. Maybe it's a harsh criticism, or maybe it's just a dismissive comment. Either way, the child feels ashamed. So, they stop drawing. They bury that part of themselves deep in their shadow because it feels too painful to face. Years go by, and they forget about their love for art. But here's the thing. That passion didn't disappear. It's still there, hidden in the shadow, waiting to be rediscovered. Now, replace drawing with whatever resonates with you. Maybe it's public speaking, writing, starting a business, or even expressing your emotions. What's that one thing you've been avoiding because it feels too risky, too vulnerable, or too painful? What if you allowed yourself to revisit it not as the person who was criticized, but as the person who's ready to grow? Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole, requires us to integrate these lost parts of ourselves. And integration isn't just about acknowledgement, it's about action. It's not enough to recognize that you've been avoiding your fears. You have to actively engage with them. You have to step into the arena, even if it feels terrifying, because that's where transformation happens. Let me share an example. In one psychological experiment, participants were asked to confront their fears in small, manageable steps. For instance, someone with a fear of public speaking might start by speaking to a small group of friends. Over time, they gradually increased the challenge, speaking to larger groups, presenting at work, and eventually addressing an audience of strangers. What researchers found was remarkable. The participants didn't just overcome their fear, they gained confidence, resilience, and a sense of empowerment that carried over into other areas of their lives. Why? Because every time they faced their fear, they proved to themselves that they were capable of more than they thought. And this isn't just about public speaking. The same principle applies to any fear. The key is to start small. Break the task into manageable pieces. Instead of trying to conquer the entire forest in one day, focus on taking one step at a time. Each step builds momentum, and with momentum comes courage. Remember this, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action despite it. Let's make this practical. I want you to think about something you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a difficult conversation, a creative project, or a personal goal. Now, ask yourself, what's the smallest step I can take toward it today? Not tomorrow, not next week, today. It could be as simple as sending an email, making a phone call, or writing down your thoughts. The point is to start. Because once you take that first step, the fear starts to lose its power. But let's not sugarcoat this. Facing your fears isn't easy. It's uncomfortable, messy, and sometimes even painful. You might fail. You might feel exposed. You might question whether it's worth it, and that's okay. Jung believed that growth doesn't happen in a straight line. It's a spiral. You'll make progress, then hit a roadblock. You'll take 2 steps forward, then 1 step back. But every time you confront your fear, you're moving closer to your true self. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Jung also believed that our fears aren't just personal, they're collective. He called this the collective unconscious. It's the idea that we all share certain fears, desires, and archetypes because they're part of our shared human experience. For example, the fear of failure isn't unique to you. It's something millions of people struggle with, and recognizing this can be incredibly empowering. Why? Because it reminds you that you're not alone. The journey you're on isn't just your journey, it's a universal one. Let me ask you a question. What's the story you're telling yourself about your fear? Is it a story of limitation, or is it a story of possibility? For instance, if you're afraid of failure, are you telling yourself, "I'm not good enough, so I'll never succeed"? Or are you telling yourself, "Failure is a part of the process, and each failure brings me closer to success"? The story you choose to tell yourself matters. It shapes your mindset, your actions, and ultimately your life. So, here's an exercise for you. The next time you feel fear, instead of running from it, try this. Pause. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, what is this fear trying to teach me? Maybe it's teaching you to be more resilient. Maybe it's showing you an area where you need to grow. Or maybe it's reminding you that you're about to step outside your comfort zone, and that's exactly where you need to be. As we move forward, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Becoming who you are afraid to be isn't about eliminating fear. It's about transforming your relationship with it. It's about seeing fear not as a barrier, but as a bridge that leads you to the version of yourself you've always wanted to become. Now that you've taken a step forward, let's talk about what happens when you're deep in the forest, when you're face to face with your fears and the path forward feels unclear. This is where most people quit. They see fear as a sign to turn back instead of an invitation to move forward. But if you can stay with it, if you can sit with that discomfort and resist the urge to run, you'll start to see something incredible. Fear, when confronted, begins to dissolve. And in its place, you'll find clarity, strength, and a deeper understanding of who you really are. Carl Jung believed that fear isn't just an emotion, it's a mirror. It reflects back the parts of ourselves we've disowned, the dreams we've abandoned, and the truths we've been too scared to admit. But here's the thing, that mirror is distorted. It makes everything seem bigger, scarier, and more overwhelming than it really is. And the only way to see clearly is to step closer, to stop avoiding the reflection and start examining it. What is it showing you about yourself, about your desires, about the life you want but are too afraid to pursue? Let's take this one step further. Jung also talked about the concept of archetypes, universal patterns and symbols that exist within the collective unconscious. These archetypes show up in myths, stories, and even our own lives. One of the most powerful archetypes is the hero. And every hero's journey begins with fear. Think of any great story. The protagonist starts out in their ordinary world, but something calls them to adventure. At first, they resist. They're afraid of leaving the familiar, of stepping into the unknown. But eventually they take the leap. And that's when the real transformation begins. What's fascinating is that the hero's journey isn't just a story, it's a psychological blueprint. It's the path we all must walk if we want to grow, evolve, and become who we're meant to be. And here's the kicker. The monsters the hero faces aren't external, they're internal. They're the shadows of doubt, fear, and insecurity that live within us all. The hero's greatest battle is always with themselves. But let's make this practical. How do you fight those internal battles? How do you confront the monsters in your own mind? One powerful technique is something Jung called active imagination. It's a way of consciously engaging with your unconscious mind. Here's how it works. Find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed. Close your eyes and imagine a dialogue with your fear. Give it a voice. Ask it questions. Why are you here? What are you trying to protect me from? What do you want me to learn? And then listen, really listen. You might be surprised by what comes up. For example, let's say you're afraid of failure. When you engage with that fear, you might discover that it's not failure itself that scares you. It's the fear of being judged, of feeling unworthy, of not being enough. And once you identify the root of your fear, you can start to work with it. You can challenge the beliefs that are holding you back. You can remind yourself that failure isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a necessary part of growth. Another powerful tool is dream analysis. Jung believed that our dreams are a direct line to the unconscious mind. They're like letters from your psyche, filled with symbols and messages that can help you understand yourself on a deeper level. So, the next time you have a vivid dream, write it down. Look for recurring themes, symbols, or emotions. What might your unconscious mind be trying to tell you? How does it connect to the fears or desires you're wrestling with in your waking life? Now, let's talk about what happens when you start to integrate the shadow. When you stop running from your fears and start embracing them, something incredible happens. You begin to reclaim your power. You stop being controlled by the parts of yourself you've been avoiding and start using them to your advantage. For example, let's say you've always been afraid of being too assertive because you were taught that it's rude or selfish. But when you integrate that part of your shadow, you realize that assertiveness isn't a bad thing, it's a necessary skill. And by embracing it, you become more confident, more effective, and more authentic. But integration isn't just about reclaiming your power. It's also about fostering compassion for yourself and others. When you confront your own fears and shadows, you begin to see that everyone else is wrestling with theirs too. You realize that the person who criticizes you might be projecting their own insecurities, that the person who seems cold or distant might be protecting themselves from being hurt. This doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does help you approach others with empathy instead of judgment. And here's the most profound part. When you integrate your shadow, you don't just transform yourself, you transform your relationships, your career, your entire life. Because the more authentic you become, the more you attract people and opportunities that align with your true self. You stop settling for what's good enough and start reaching for what's truly meaningful. Let's pause for a moment. I want you to think about one area of your life where you feel stuck. Maybe it's a relationship, a job, or a personal goal. Now ask yourself, what fear is keeping me stuck? What story am I telling myself that's holding me back? And what's one small step I can take today to challenge that fear? It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a step. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's what this journey is all about. It's not about becoming someone else. It's not about fixing yourself because you're not broken. It's about peeling back the layers of fear, doubt, and conditioning to reveal the person you've always been underneath. It's about stepping into your own power, owning your truth, and living a life that feels aligned with your deepest values. But here's the thing. This journey doesn't have a finish line. You don't wake up one day and say, "I've arrived," because becoming who you are afraid to be is a lifelong process. There will always be more fears to face, more shadows to integrate, more truths to uncover. And that's not a bad thing. That's what makes life rich, meaningful, and full of possibility. So, as we come to the end of this journey, I want to leave you with one final question. What kind of life do you want to look back on? One where you played it safe, stayed in your comfort zone, and avoided your fears? Or one where you took risks, embraced your shadows, and became the person you were meant to be? The choice is yours, and the forest is waiting. Thank you for staying with me on this journey. Now, it's your turn to take the next step.